Good evening, everyone. Good evening to all our participants on Zoom and all the viewers watching on Facebook Live tonight. I'd like to welcome everyone again to the Learning Event Series, and this is our 9th session. The Learning Event Series is brought to you by the Dumaguete City Lions Club and the Rotary Club of Dumaguete South. I would like to remind all our participants and viewers that you can type in your questions for our guest speaker tonight in the Q&A box in Zoom or on FB Live. And I will try my best to accommodate and ask all of your questions tonight. In last night's lecture event, our guest speaker discussed 3 main points. He introduced us to what corals and coral reefs are, described their critical ecological functions and the importance of coral reefs to human society. And he highlighted the current state of Philippine coral reefs based on the most recent national assessments. In recent weeks, several scientists and scientific organizations have already voiced their opposition to the proposed smart city, mainly because of its monumental negative impacts on Dumaguete's marine ecosystems. However, in recent weeks, the mayor and supporters of this smart city proposal have also countered this by saying that we can mitigate, lessen, or obviate, or even prevent any damage to the marine life of Dumaguete. Terms such as coral relocation, propagation, coral restoration have been used, or we've been seeing or reading a lot of it already on social media. But what does that really mean? What does coral restoration mean? Is it really that simple? Because it's been used quite a lot in the discussions lately. So tonight, we have an expert on coral restoration, and she will be giving us more information about this. So to introduce our speaker for tonight, Dr. Laurie Raymundo is a professor of biology at the University of Guam, and she has been the director of the University of Guam Marine Laboratory since 2019. She is a co-founder and member of the Coral Reef Restoration and Intervention Partnership and a member of the Guam Restoration Strategy Working Group. Dr. Raymundo actually began her career in the Philippines and was in fact an associate professor of the Silliman University Biology Department from 1988 to 2004. And while she was still living here in the Philippines, she documented the impacts of dynamite blasting and severe overfishing on coral reefs, while witnessing the establishment of some of the most successful marine protected areas in the world. Her interests as a coral biologist have always centered around finding approaches to mitigate the impacts of human stressors on coral health. And she always tries to meld science and management. So when she transferred to Guam, she observed the disturbing amount of mass mortality there. And this has brought her and her students back to their roots in terms of researching about coral propagation and restoration and using it as a management tool for conservation. Her lab's research ranges from coral culture and propagation to the physiology of stress responses to managing coral disease and bleaching during reef restoration efforts. So without further ado, I'd like to transfer the floor to our distinguished speaker tonight, Dr. Laurie Raymundo.
Unmuted. Maayong gabi kaninyong tanan. I hope that the technology is working and everybody can see the screen. Unmute myself. There. Okay. Thank you, Nadia, for that really wonderful and very eloquent introduction. I've never actually been that good at describing what I do, but you did a very good job. So this evening, I would like to talk about coral restoration in the context of this reclamation project. My daughter, right before this, informed me that there might be some people listening who are not from Dumaguete, don't have any connection to the current issues, and may not have quite as much background. So I'll just provide a little bit of context. So there's a very large reclamation project. You will see maps later on tonight that is proposed. It has raised a great deal of concern. And this group of people who are running this lecture series have done a really quite remarkable job of pulling in experts in all of the various aspects of these issues. And people have been coming out in the hundreds to listen to these lectures in the evenings. Everything from legal issues to geopolitics, to security, to biology, to geology and oceanography and hydro geology types of concerns. And so before I go any further, I would just like to really draw attention to this really amazing learning event series. It is such an amazing thing to just be involved in this effort. I've never actually had this experience where a group of people have just come together to teach themselves what they need to know, to empower themselves, and to reach a state of activism to enable them to make wise decisions that are based on fact. So you are to be congratulated for running this series, and I am very proud to be a part of it. So to get started, so I stopped the, okay, let me see. Okay. Whew. I forgot I didn't have my mouse. Okay, so this is what I'd like to cover tonight. Just go over some definitions. You've heard a lot of terms being thrown around. We're going to try to clarify what we actually use those terms for. A little bit about restoration and what kinds of systems are restored. And then we will move right into coral reef restoration and talk a little bit about the problems with that. I'll give you some examples of some what are considered successful restoration projects. And then we will finally end with some thoughts about how restoration fits in with the current, what is being said by Mayor Remollo and other people about the possibility of restoration in light of this reclamation project. Okay, so what is ecological restoration? The Society for Ecological Restoration describes this as the process of assisting in the recovery of an ecosystem that has been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. So you see a picture on the left, could have been the result of a mining operation or some kind of construction operation. And you see the system on the right, which is obviously had vegetation restored and which has now become more productive and able to function more like some type of productive ecosystem. So that would be an example. Why do we do it? When you look at proposals and publications, tech reports, the first thing that we are all taught as those of us who practice this is define your goals and objectives. What is it that you're trying to do? Because you can't do everything. So what is the focus? What is the most important thing? It might be to restore lost function or productivity. It might be to preserve or manage specific species at risk. We may be trying to preserve biodiversity. At times, actually, yes, it has been used to sustain tourism. A restored area can provide a lot of tourist dollars from very satisfied divers or hikers. Sometimes they can be used actually to promote community stewardship. Some projects get communities involved and they achieve a great deal of satisfaction and knowledge of the systems that they are helping to restore. You get community buy-in. You might be doing this to recover coastal protection or to respond to acute disturbances, typhoons, storms, fires. Finally, and most urgently and most recently, we may be doing it to promote resilience to climate change. So if you look at this list, what is the one thing you don't see? You don't see we do it to replace a destroyed ecosystem. We don't think of this in terms of just making another ecosystem because we've decided to destroy one or cover it over with something. We are not at that stage where we have the technology to do this on a very large scale. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Okay, terms that have been thrown around: restoration, mitigation, relocation. Let's just make sure that we're all on the same page regarding what we mean when we use those terms. Restoration, we've just defined, assisting the recovery. So this small picture here was actually a project that I did with local colleagues in Kalagkalag, Ayun several years ago, actually early 2000s. And there was a large area that had been dynamite blasted, and the fishers wanted to recover some of that productivity and structure because it was within their MPA. And the rubble field had been there for 10 years, no sign of recovery. So we tried some stabilization and some planting, and lo and behold, this is 4 years later, where you can see some live corals that have glued themselves down. So on this very, very small scale, there was some success in doing that. Mitigation is something a little different. It is an attempt to compensate for damages done to an ecological system. Usually this term is used when the system is actually physically destroyed and you cannot assist the recovery, but you are required to compensate somehow. You may try to create something equivalent. You may fund something which is equivalent. For example, this coral nursery here could have been the result of funding provided by compensation, compensatory mitigation. So there's a lot of different ways that a company might be required to pay for compensatory mitigation. And finally, relocation. That is the act of removing organisms which are in the path of destruction. They are at risk from destruction from an area that has been deemed usable for some other purpose, such as a reclamation project. So you move the organisms out of harm's way and you reattach them somewhere where they can grow, they can become reattached. In this particular photo here, there is not substrate which can support the coral growth. So substrate has been added so that the corals will be attached. And obviously that very complex three-dimensional structure also serves to attract fish. So it's meant to be a fish habitat as well. So those are a few terms, perhaps hopefully they're a little clearer to you now because I know you've been hearing them. Okay, and what sorts of systems do we have some knowledge about how to restore? We actually have a fair bit of knowledge, and it's growing because we are seeing more and more that restoration really has to be a tool in our conservation management toolbox. It is not the only tool, and very often restoration is used in concert with a variety of other actions. But these are all of the systems these days where we have some sort of effort going on, quite a few of them. Some of them we know a lot more about than others. Coral restoration is something that is still very much in its infancy. Forest restoration we have been involved with for hundreds of years because we have been cutting down trees for hundreds of years. We don't grow tropical rainforests, we grow forests of very simple diversity and simple structure. But we do have a great deal of knowledge of that. Coral restoration, not so much. That has only been a field for the last couple of decades, and we are learning a great deal and we are applying a great deal. And it's a very exciting field to be in because so much is being learned, and we're trying so many different things. We're bringing in genetics and microbiology and physiology, as well as engineering and architecture and all of these different things. So it's really a blend of different fields that are feeding into and informing this field as it grows. So I just like to add these caveats to get everyone thinking about what we can currently do and what we cannot do. Restoration should not be considered a replacement for conventional strategies like marine protection and threat reduction. It is a tool along with other tools, such as the establishment of marine protected areas and reducing threats, improving water quality, and a lot of different things like that. So a take-home point right now, restoration is not a solution for wholesale destruction. We do not know how to replace entire ecosystems. We can assist in their recovery. We don't know enough to be able to do this on a wide scale. That's what we don't know. Okay, so now we can turn to a few examples of the types of projects which fall within the realm of restoration. The vast majority of projects which are in the literature, which have some sort of restoration application, are small-scale research projects which teach us something about how to do the big things. Think of this as a very, very large puzzle, and each of the pieces have to fit together, and we need all of the pieces in order to complete the puzzle. So this is a study that just came out, Ligson and Kabaitan. These are researchers out of, I think they are UP, and this was done in Bolinao and Lingayen Gulf. And these researchers were looking at certain aspects of reproductive biology and seeing if they could actually spawn corals in the lab, fertilize them, get them to settle, plant them out onto the reef, and have some survival, and then have those outplanted corals, which they grew themselves, actually becoming mature and sexually reproducing themselves. This was a very good project. It added a piece to the puzzle, and they were successful. They actually did get some survivors surviving and reproducing after 4 years. So the vast majority of projects are these small scale, let us learn something and contribute to this growing body of knowledge. Now, the work that I'm involved in right now in Guam is attempting to take a lot of those pieces of the puzzle and try to put them together in a way that will allow us to expand the scale that we are trying this at. So I am tasked with a project which is slated to take 3 to 4 years. We are just starting our 2nd year. And we are trying to save a group of species that have suffered very great mortality from climate change induced bleaching. We are tasked with planting about 4,600 fragments across a 1 hectare area, or combined area will be 1 hectare over this period of years, to try to stimulate the recovery of some of these populations and hopefully reduce the extinction risk of certain species, which, well, the local extinction risk of certain species that are now reduced to only a single population. So we're trying to prevent local extinction of several species. So 1 hectare of restored population over a period of 3 to 4 years, because, you know, we all have other jobs as well. So this is one project of many. The budget for this is $900,000 or 44 million pesos. So it's keeping us busy. This is my team. I think they're watching tonight. Hello, team. And they're working very hard, and we're learning a great deal about how to do this. We've had some successes. We continually modify our methods so that we can improve what we're doing and improve our success. Okay, now to get on to something that might look a little closer to this reclamation project. This is a project of Dr. Al Liquanan, the speaker last night. He was involved in a portion of this project. That's him there in the diving, tagging a coral. The Pagbilao, Quezon power plant extension. So the area here in the yellow circle is the footprint of this pipe extension that they're going to, this power plant needed to lay on the seabed. And there was active coral growth within this area. So they were required to relocate the corals. They had to find a suitable area. Fortunately, they found an area right about 200 meters away. This entire area takes up about 0.7 hectares, 7,000. Well, actually, no, sorry. The restoration area takes up about 3 hectares. This area of destruction, the area to be dredged and used for another purpose, was about 0.7 hectares. The team first had to create suitable substrate. There was only a portion of that area that had suitable hard substrate, because you cannot grow corals on sand. They need a hard substrate. So they had to first place all of these cement blocks, which were very heavy and very stable. And then they planted the corals on them. So over a period of time, 648 person days, which translates into about 5 divers working for about 6.5 months. They relocated 3,000 corals, but they first had to survey. They had to tag those that were considered possible survivors of this very stressful process. They had to lay the substrate, and then they had to do the moving and then the monitoring afterwards. Because when you glue things down, sometimes you have to go back and you have to glue them down again, because they don't always stick the first time. It was difficult for them to figure out the total cost of this project, because there were so many different teams involved and different aspects of it. But a partial cost was 3.25 million. So again, just keep those figures in mind as you think about what is being proposed for Dumaguete. It's important that we keep our perspective and keep ourselves anchored in facts and what is real and what is possible. Okay, another project, which is at an even larger scale, the Doha Carter project, which was designed to provide a new port. So the port is all of this area here. It's not filled in. Basically, this was just kind of the design. I think this area is filled. And then there are some slips for large ships. And so this was proposed. The contractors had to do some relocation first, because the surveys revealed that there was a patch of corals, 1,500 square meters, which would certainly be destroyed. And then an adjacent patch here, about 2,500 square meters, so a total of 0.4 hectares of corals that were likely to die if they were not moved. So again, the contractors had to create some hard substrate. They found a place which was suitable outside of the path of destruction, and they relocated the corals there. This project took, they actually moved 10,000 corals, and they installed another 800 cubic meters of hard substrate. So they had to do that first. So the surveys, the substrates, then the moving of the corals. and then the monitoring afterwards. And this project took 5 million for that whole process, from the surveying to the creation of the plan to the cementing of and the monitoring of the transplants themselves. Now, just to give you some more things to think about, this is what these corals look like. First of all, they were fairly small. They probably had a few big ones, but that part of the world, I would think they were probably maybe this sized corals. So there was a lot of them that they moved, and it took them several months to get that done. And this was planned 5 years before the project was slated to be done. So the planning, the surveying, the relocation, and the monitoring took place years before any construction was done. The relocation and the restoration work was built into the project. It was conceived along with the project, and it was budgeted for before any construction started. That is the way these projects successfully are undertaken. The mortality was probably fairly low. The water quality seems fairly high. Corals were, moved very quickly, relocated very quickly by a team of very professional, very practiced contractors. And so we probably saw some success. And that is the type of effort that it takes to be successful. Now, finally, we get to this Jamaica project, which many of you may have heard about. I know that Mayor Remolio mentioned this several times. He has cited this study. So I was curious about this study and got a few papers. There's actually been quite a lot written about this, technical reports, some publications, and you see them there. I cite 3 of them in this collection of facts about this project. So this was the Falmouth cruise ship port project in Jamaica. So tourism is a very big source of economy there. It's a driver of their economy. And these enormous cruise ships come in, and they wanted to be able to have a berth for 2 ships. So this is sorry. Okay, let me go out. Get back on track. Okay, apologies. I don't know if I'm on.
Not yet, Dr. Laurie.
I'm not on. I can't see the screen sharing. Let me share my screen again. I'm sorry. Okay. There. Yay. We're all used to this, Dima. This is our life right now. Okay, so this was the project. So 2 berthings were desired. So this project actually started, the planning again for this project, for all the relocation, started in 2007. The actual construction didn't happen until around 2011-12, completed in 2013. So all of this planning for the environmental impacts started 5 years before any construction was done. There was 11 hectares of reef area affected. That is about 6% of the Dumaguete project. They relocated 150,000 corals. They also relocated the balat and the tuyom and the salwaki and the alimango and the mga mananap. Fish can't relocate fish. They either find their way or they die. That's the problem with fish. And seagrass was also a part of this restoration project. This took 93 divers working for 8 months to do all of this work. In addition, any corals that were damaged by whatever physical damage, that required additional compensation. So the company had to pay for those corals that were damaged. They found relocation sites near, and they were very similar to the original site. So this was a project which took an enormous amount of effort, more effort than most companies are willing to take. And yet the local population still considered this to be of enormous environmental impact. It was actually criticized for the amount of ecological impacts it created, despite all of this effort. Okay, so now we come to home, the Smart City Coastal Reclamation Project. I would like to address a few of the comments of Mayor Remolio, which I heard when I was listening to his lecture on Monday. So first of all, the mayor expressed the need for marine surveys. He said we need to know what is there, where it is, how much we have. By now, we all have heard his comments about the lack of coral along our coastline. Well, I would just like to inform the mayor that in fact, this very useful map already exists. This is a benthic habitat map, which was prepared by my colleague Jasper Maipa of SUACREM. It shows the location of our marine protected areas. It shows where our corals, seagrass, and mangroves exist. No, we did not. I don't think anybody's gone and counted any colonies, but we know where these communities are. We know how big they are. And we know that we will lose about 60% of the corals along the Dumaguete coastline and 65% of the seagrasses. A total of 128.3 hectares of productive marine ecosystems, including 4 legally protected marine protected areas. With this reclamation project, as you can see here, the outline of the footprint of the reclaimed area is there. It's in the dashed lines. I think many of you have all seen this map. So I'm hoping that if the mayor has not seen this map, it might be good if someone provided it to him so he will be able to see that there's already information that is available. Okay, a few points that I would like to make. The reality is, you could see from those few studies that I cited that massive restoration is very expensive. But the Dumaguete size, the size of the Dumaguete reclamation project is far beyond massive. It is monumental to the point where there is no physical way that those communities could be saved in any way. They can't be moved and they can't, well, we'll discuss the air concept in a moment. I would like to blatantly steal my colleague Renee Abisami's slide. You may have seen this. It's worth revisiting. In this slide, Dr. Abisamis gives you some idea of the scale that we are talking about. So this is the size of most small restoration projects. This is why restoration biologists have often been criticized. You know, you really have to think about scaling up because you're not doing anything on a meaningful scale. So that's why this project I'm doing is trying to scale up a little bit. And this is the relative scale that I'm working at. Still quite small, but we feel that it will be useful for this species group that we are focused on. This is the size of the Dumaguete reclamation project. The fact is, I could not find any examples in the literature where restoration was successfully done at this scale. Most of the time, it's just not, I don't even know of any attempts to do it. Usually the area is just covered over and everybody acts as though it never existed. Life goes on, except for the life that was killed by the reclamation project. That's the reality. And that's what we have to realize, that there is no way that this can be undertaken. We just, the funds aren't there. The funds, the time, the resources, everything, nothing is there that would allow that to proceed. Now, the mayor did mention an environmental fund. He did not identify where the funds would be coming from. Obviously, Ian Cuerpo and Polly Changda did not work this into their budget. But the reality is contractors are supposed to pay for this. But what I understood was being said regarding this environmental fund was that maybe the people of Dumaguete might be asked to pay for this somehow, pay for the destruction of their own reefs. So this is something that people have to think about. It shocked me when I heard it, because in projects where restoration occurs, the contractors pay. They work it into their budget. That's the way it happens. They're going to damage this, they pay for that damage. They get people who are trained to do the work, they come in and they do the work. But nobody has ever done anything at this scale, especially with no money. So I'm not really sure. That statement of an environmental fund did not reassure me at all, because I could not imagine where those funds would come from. There was just no, good, no details provided. Okay, so just to end this, some thoughts on the AIR concept. AIR is a cute acronym. It's friendly: avoid, integrate, replace. Everybody likes acronyms, makes our life easier. But to be honest, I could not imagine what was meant by this. The words were there. I didn't know how to translate the words into action. I just could not imagine. Me with my restoration brain was thinking, okay, so for example, avoid. How do you avoid? This is the image that came into my mind when I thought avoid. What is meant by avoid? Is the esplanade going to have these areas where it's just water and coral reef underneath, and then it will be enclosed in something, and so the corals will just kind of be there somehow and we'll just walk around them? I don't know how that can be done, because these are the machines that are going to be used to fill in that reclaimed area. And I don't know how those machines are going to avoid that. My brain is not conceiving of how this is going to be done. So I was trying to imagine how could you avoid, given where the reclamation area is planned, given where the coral reef lies and the seagrass lies. I don't understand how avoidance can be undertaken. It just, there aren't any ideas being discussed about how that can happen. Okay, likewise, integrate. We will integrate the sea creatures. That is something that was said during that lecture. So that brought another thing to mind. I'm an avid gardener. Many of you probably are. We plant gardens because we like to grow food, or because we love plants. We love this aesthetic appeal of growing this kind of thing in our yard and coming home to a view like this. But none of us who are growing a garden actually fool ourselves into thinking that we are planting a rainforest. A garden is not a rainforest. It has its value, certainly, but it does not replace forest. Likewise, there was some mention of an aquarium, that we have the technology to make a big aquarium. An aquarium is not a coral reef. In fact, corals generally do not survive very long in most aquaria. It takes a very, very talented aquaculturist and aquarium scientist to keep corals happy in aquaria. So aquaria are not equivalent to coral reefs. They don't feed fisher folk, they don't feed humans, they don't have the biodiversity, they don't have the productivity or the structure or anything. They are useful for outreach, certainly. They are very useful for their aesthetic value and their educational value, but they do not replace coral reefs. So how things are, how the reef, the existing reef, is to be integrated into this project, I see no evidence that that can happen or that it will happen. There is nothing that has been said that I have seen that suggests that any actual thought is being put into this. And certainly there is no budget being put into this. So finally, replace. We will replace with the same quantity of sea creatures, sea life. So I invite the mayor perhaps to consult this map, another map which is freely available. I'm not sure again if the mayor has seen this, if the city council has seen this. I don't know who has seen this map, but it's passed around freely. It's freely available. This is a mathematic map. And these lines here are what we call isolines, and the numbers represent the depth along that line. So if you see here, these lines are very close together. What that means is that that is a very steep slope, kind of like a mountain, which is what makes Dumaguete a very good port city, because the water is very deep and it's sand on the bottom. So ships can come in and out very easily. Unfortunately, what this means is all of this area here, which is the very shallow area, that's where the corals and the seagrass can grow. And by the time you get outside of this area where the reclamation has been filled in, there is no space to replace anything. There's nothing to replace. It's all sand and it's very deep and it's dark. So you cannot replace seagrass. And the only corals that could live down that deep are already adapted to that depth. Nothing that grows in the shallows could be planted down there. And there's no substrate. So replacing is not an option because there is nowhere to replace anything. So this map addresses another question that was posed. We need to know the actual topography of marine life. Well, we have information on the topography of the seafloor. That information is already available. And we can see that there is no way to replace anything. There's no place for it to go. So I think that is all that I have. Oh no, yeah, just this one last thing, one last little detail. So just to put things in context in everyone's mind, the Jamaican study that was cited as being something equivalent transplanted 150,000 corals within an 11-hectare area. The Dumaguete project is 122 hectares of coral. We don't know how many colonies. If we scale up, that's about 1.6 million colonies that would have to be transplanted. So I leave you to that thought. I'd like to thank a number of people who have helped me get this together. And daghang salamat. I'm willing to take questions and very happy to start a discussion. And I'd like to specifically say hello and good evening to my transplantation team who teach me new things every day, as well as all of my colleagues who helped me get this talk together. Daghang salamat. Istorya nata.
Thank you, Dr. Laurie, for that I found it very fascinating. Actually, it's like you answered almost all the questions already, but we like every day, oh, tick the box.
Oh, that's a good talk.
You answered all the questions, but no, we still have quite a few
Oh, yes, yes,
questions.
yes. I'm
No,
sure there's a
so
lot of questions.
before I go to the questions themselves, I just like to correct. Well, my husband said that the first map you showed with the MPAs and the proposed smart city, that was created by Daniel Fukuda
Ah,
of the Institute of Environment and Marine
apologies.
Science. Yeah, so
Apologies.
just to give credit to the one who
Yes,
actually did. That's the first one, the first map. The one with the
yes.
MPA showing it. Okay.
Apologies to Daniel Fukuda.
Okay. So I think I was looking through the questions and I'd like to start from just basic ecological questions before we move on to very specific ones that deals with the issues of the proposed smart city project. So there's one participant that asked, there's so much emphasis on biodiversity, and so much value given to it. What benefit does biodiversity really have over a reef of just a dozen or so coral species? Or I guess he's wondering, why should we care about biodiversity? Why is it so important?
Oh, there are a lot of reasons. Dr. Likwanan discussed some of them last night. The fact is, we understand ecosystems to be very large organisms. Just like in your body, you have lots of organs. They all interact to make you function well. If you remove one of those organs, your functioning is not going to be, well, I mean, you might not function at all depending on the organ. Or your functioning might be reduced. For example, if you remove someone's lung, okay, they can survive with one lung. That's called functional redundancy, no? But if they lose the second lung, wala na, patay na sila. So ecosystems work very much the same way. Think of them as large organisms that have a lot of interacting parts. And we as human beings do not understand all of the functioning of those parts. So if we remove ones, then that we could cause a catastrophic failure, or we could lessen the capacity of that system to survive stress. And remember that we rely on these systems for food. If nothing else, think about food security. Yes, you might think, okay, that starfish doesn't really make a difference. Well, that one starfish may not make a difference. It might make a difference to your son or daughter who wants to learn about it and they're just playing in the beach and thinking about it. But all in all, if you remove the entire population of those starfishes, it could have an effect. We might not understand the effect. So that's one thing, just the functioning of the ecosystem as an organism. Another thing that was mentioned last night was the idea that we have developed a lot of drugs to cure diseases from this biodiversity. And we know that there are a lot of chemicals that are produced by organisms. A lot of them we have not even found yet. We haven't discovered them. And if we lose this biodiversity, we could lose the capacity to keep, our food security and, the biomedical implications as well. So that's a short answer.
Okay. There's a question that's sort of related to this because, as you mentioned, you talked about the ecological value of it, and also the benefits that people can get. But I think sometimes people find it hard to value biodiversity because there are no numbers attached to it. So one participant asks, since it seems like a big deal of this project is anchored on money, can you give advice in terms of money also as to how much we are actually going to lose? So I guess maybe the question is like, if we value, put a dollar, a peso sign on your coral reefs or your seagrasses, can we give, are there those numbers to
Yes.
sort of reiterate to people that they are valuable?
Well, I would have, if you want a specific reference, I'll have to get your email address and answer you with an answer. There have been a number of publications which have actually done what we call valuation studies of different types of systems. So a valuation, an economic valuation, is determined by things like food security, so how much can be harvested, which can be eaten. What is the educational value? What is the tourism value? What most of these valuation studies find is that ecosystems are much more economically valuable alive than destroyed. Tourism daan. Dumaguete is a tourism mecca. I have so many friends in Guam that have gone to my hometown to dive. And they go there because we have viable and beautiful ecosystems. People need to be connected to nature, which brings me to the third aspect of valuation, one of several. The reason why this is sometimes a challenge to put a fixed number is because how much of a number do you put on something like how much you enjoy walking along the beach, snorkeling or swimming, walking in the forest? These are incalculable values, which it's very difficult to put a number on. So aside from the practical things like food and drug development and coastal protection, all of those things we can put a number on, and people have put numbers on them. You can read about that. Then you have the harder to value things like what we want to teach our children and creating a healthy planet which we will be able to survive in, and putting a value on the pleasure that we get from being in nature and being connected to nature. So yes, those values do exist and they have been published. I don't have them memorized.
Yeah. I can't also give any answer to that, even if I'm a scientist.
I'm not an economist.
Okay. So let's move more onto your expertise on coral restorations. There was a question on the matter of scale. No? One participant asked, what kind of technology is required for large scale restoration? Maybe it would be good to say, what do we mean when we're saying large scale? What is large when you're talking about, say, coral reef restoration? And if you do restore at a large scale, what are the usual technologies used, or what's available currently?
The same technologies as used for small scale, basically, except for really large colonies, which really cannot be moved unless you have a crane. You know, like those, you know, the really big, what they call kind of brain corals of varieties. And there's some in Bantayan, they're all along our coast. Those are several hundred years old, probably. They've been through all the world wars and whatever, blah, blah. They've been there for a long time. You can tell from the size. But so aside from those huge colonies, which essentially cannot be removed and transported because you need a crane, you're talking about the same techniques that we use for small scale, only for a much longer time and with a lot more resources. So you're talking about divers going down, chiseling away the live corals, putting them into a container, transporting them somewhere on a boat, usually, and then cementing them back down again. So the question of scale is more like that. If you have to provide hard substrates, then you might need a crane and big cement blocks, because that's also been done, you know, and that will create the fish habitat and the habitat to glue the corals on. But you're basically talking about the same thing: divers, cement, hammer and chisel, lots of boat time, and lots of time underwater. It's just a question of the spatial scale that you have to do it over. It gets much larger.
Okay, related to sort of the scale, you may choose to answer this or not, but one said or asked, how massive is massive destruction of biodiversity? Enough to convince Mayor Remolyo or maybe any, say, local government to stop pursuing a reclamation of this size? Like, because there's always that argument that you cannot have development without destroying, you know, or at least having some impact on your environment. Okay, that's true. But when do you say that this is too much? Okay.
That is a really good question that I wish I could answer, but it's not really up to me to decide what is too much. The people of Dumaguete have to decide what are they willing to live without. That's what it boils down to. Diba? Clearly, the fact that this lecture series is taking place, it's already a statement that this project is too much. That I think I mean, I don't even want to try to answer that because there are so many aspects of this project which have been identified as being bad. It's not just the environmental aspects. It's the economic thing. It's the promise of new jobs where it's probably not even going to be local Dumagueteños that are even hired. It's the security aspect. There's so many things that are wrong with this. So I would rather just stick to talking about, my area of expertise. Generally, when people decide what is too much, you have to decide for yourselves what you are willing to live without. Each community, because that's what it boils down to. It's getting more and more to be a community-based decision-making process. When you go into these small community, when you go into a community and you tell them, oh, you have to do this because it's good for you. It's not true that development always comes at an environmental cost. There has to be some compromise. We have gone on too long just saying, oh, well, they're mutually exclusive. You can't take care of the environment and develop. We already know that that's a very dangerous way of thinking. We are in the midst of global climate change. We have already made that mistake. We have to stop thinking that those two things are mutually exclusive. They cannot be. We are driving ourselves off of the only planet we have by continuing with that way of thinking. If a development project is too destructive to the environment, then we simply have to do without it, or we have to look for some other way to get certain things done that we want. We don't need an esplanade. We don't need a yacht club that Dumagueteños are not even going to use. My goodness. We need the wastewater treatment plant. Absolutely. It doesn't have to be accompanied by this enormous sidewalk. So, yeah.
That's true. So I think it's really
Mm-mm.
okay. So I will go back. You mentioned, climate change and resilience. I'll go back to that a little bit later. So let's go back to the restoration techniques, because there are still a few questions on that.
Mm-mm.
So
Sure.
there is one question or participant that said, last night's speaker mentioned a difference between our corals and that of the Caribbean. And he said, Dr. Liquanan said, in terms of diversity, we have so much more, etc. So how are they different, or how does this difference affect a relocation effort, for instance, like the one you cited in Jamaica, and say if you would do that in the Philippines, if ever? So the participant specifically said, if ever that's what the contractor will plan to do, to relocate the corals, would there be a difference?
I can guarantee you the contractor is not planning to do this at all. They don't even know how to do it. That's not in their plan. It makes an enormous difference. It makes it much more complicated. Jamaican reefs are in the Caribbean. They have about 80 species. Oh my goodness, Al, you can kasabot me if you want. I think we're up to 350 or so in the Philippines. I'm not really sure what the number is, and counting. Hundreds more. Mm-hmm. So if you want to, you can create coral communities by moving a few species, but you don't even know if those are the ones that will recreate the community. You can save some of them, certainly, but when you have that many more species, you can't possibly save all of them. And the most rare ones might actually be of key importance to the functioning of that community. So we just don't even know enough about how these communities are built. This is an idea that my daughter actually recently brought to my attention. She's a terrestrial ecologist, so she thinks about these things. We know a lot more about them in the terrestrial ecosystems. But in marine systems, we are only beginning to see how things interact with each other and how critical those interactions are. So the yeah, that was a good analogy. The Jamaican reefs are so much less diverse and therefore a lot simpler than ours. But the Jamaican reefs, the Caribbean reefs are undergoing enormous amounts of mortality. And one of the hypotheses is because they are so much less diverse. So the diversity of our reefs here might be the very thing that is keeping allowing some of our reefs to recover and to survive stress. So that's another pro for plus for biodiversity maintenance.
Sorry. Okay. Sorry.
I think we froze for a moment.
Yeah. Okay. So, so that's a good distinction because of the complexity of our and just high biodiversity. It's just the same. It would be a more complex restoration effort and probably more expensive. There was one question that said, the mayor, through his information drives, is insisting on the simplicity of restoring, or it sort of, that's how it comes when he talks about it. Sounds so simple. We can do this, we can do that in terms of restoring and relocating corals. It seems to be oversimplified in his talks. What could be a sound advice to the mayor in regards to how he said that there is much advanced technology now that makes all of these possible? Those were his exact words. So is it true there's really a lot of advanced technology? But if there was, can that really be used?
To be honest, yes, I remember that comment. I have no idea what the mayor is talking about. I have no idea what technologies he is referring to. When my team and I go out, we have bags of cement, hammer and chisels, and our strength and our time underwater. There isn't any technology that exists to my knowledge. Now, we are doing a lot of things like trying to find out how much genetic diversity we have so we can plant with the thought of maintaining as much diversity as possible. We are looking at the microbiological aspects and the physiological aspects and the reproductive aspects. That's all research. There isn't anything that exists right now which would support that statement. I just don't understand what he means by that. I literally do not know. It's cement and hammers and chisels, and sometimes some cement blocks or wire frames. We don't need. Yes.
But he did at some point mention that years ago they were using artificial reefs. He mentioned that in some of his statements. Do you think artificial reefs are an answer, or is it even considered a type of coral restoration?
Artificial reefs were banned many years ago because we figured out that it was just a means of human beings using the ocean as a trash dump. So let's just throw our tires because we don't want them here, so we throw them in the water. And it turns out the corals cannot settle on rubber, and rubber is actually toxic, and so nothing grows on them. We can augment substrate. I think what people think about, you've seen some of those, we use them, we all use them. So if you have sand in a place and you need to move corals, you can put cement blocks down. And, those cement blocks have some structure to them. So they provide fish habitat, fish refuge. So that, yes, that is something that we do. Again, it's not a high technology thing. Sometimes there is, in large scale projects, we might ask for some engineering advice. Certainly, engineers have been brought into some of these studies, some of these projects to sort of solve problems like for stability and how to get things into the water and put them in certain positions. We have lift bags if we're divers, you know, to control the descent of heavy things. So yes, at some point we may put down structures, but the idea is that those structures will be used to glue corals onto. So we're providing some substrate for them, and we can jumpstart. Certainly, a lot of what we do is what we call jumpstarting. We give them, we get them going, diba?
Yeah.
So we can grow things in a nursery, then we plant them out. They're in a bigger size, and we may provide some habitat for the fish. So that is certainly used, but I don't know if that would be considered a lot of very advanced technology. It's still hollow blocks.
Cement blocks. Okay.
Cement blocks.
Cement blocks. So since we don't know what the mayor was referring to when he talked about advanced technology, let's just go towards the cost. You already cited some very high figures in the examples you showed that did coral restoration or rehabilitation. So there is a question about the proposed or the cost, if ever. So he said the proposed 174 hectare reclamation will hit 4 MPAs or your marine protected areas. If ever, or if by some chance, relocation of the corals in these MPAs were possible, sounds like a hypothetical question. How much will your estimate cost be for this? Or do you think you can think of a ballpark figure? And how long do you think it will take to transfer the corals from those 4 MPAs? How long will they grow? Is there even an area near the reclamation where they can transfer them? Quite a lot of questions in just one.
Yeah. No, that's good. Okay, that is not the kind of question that it would be responsible for me to try to answer, just to throw it out. There are people there that can hit the ground and can do the work to figure that out. Usually it takes a survey and a study and an environmental management plan and a restoration plan. All of that needs to be done by people on the ground that are there doing the surveys. They would have to choose how many corals can we reasonably save, which ones can we not move. Regarding where they would be put, I've thought about that. I can't think, because to the south of Banilad, you get to Bacong. That's a very different slope. It's got different sand. It's a very steep slope. The currents are very strong. There's no substrate there. In fact, all of the small reefs that are down there, they're all patch reefs. They're just like the house reefs of the resorts. No, to the north, Sibulan and that area. I mean, I would think that first of all, you would have to have some discussions with the mayors of those towns and see there has to be some permission granted to, like do that kind of thing. You might be able to find some areas, but no place nearby, because the reclamation area is literally so large that you're basically destroying everything that's there already. So there's no space there. You can't go seaward because it's too deep. And along the coast, you get into very different systems. It's that long. So you notice that in those other projects I cited, at the most, it was just a couple of kilometers away that they found a suitable site. So that's the site. I mean, you would definitely need to get people on the ground in the water to do the surveys of the marine protected areas. There's probably already some information available about what's growing there, but just in terms of what you can literally pick up and move, that would require some preliminary homework first. Now, keep in mind that So the costs, my cost for my project is paying 3 people, 4 people, and training 2 students. So the cost of employing those people and training them and getting them, part of the project is, part of the cost. A lot of times it's paying human beings, but paying human beings is a legitimate expense. Sueldo. You
Yeah.
have to pay the sueldo.
Yes.
So for a lot of restoration, the boat time, and then oftentimes the materials themselves, it's cement and hollow blocks. I mean, it's really, we don't spend that much for our materials.
Mhm.
But the boat time and the number of
The
divers, the
man-hours.
dive
Yep.
support, that's, yes. But what are you going to do? You're going to not pay people? I mean, there was this big statement of jobs being created. Oh, sige, pag-create of jobs, pag-hire of restoration technicians, sige. Create all of those jobs and put all of those divers in the water and employ them for the next 3 years.
True. But
Yeah.
a good question there is, was that built into the 23 billion budget?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
we don't think so. But
Mhm.
speaking of the responsibility of, say, a contractor, one participant asked, should the contractor of an environmentally sensitive infrastructure project also pay for the damage to the value of ecosystem services of coral reefs? So for example, if you lost tourism value or fisheries value per hectare over a certain number of years, should that cost be shouldered by the contractor? Or
Interesting question. Should is different from is, diba?
is
So, I mean, I think that the contractor would argue that the Esplanade is already going to be a tourist attraction, so why should they pay for the loss of the diving, blah, blah, blah. So
Yeah.
they cannot. Nobody would do it if they had to pay for that. That's the reality. So they compensate for the environmental damage, and that's all they would ever do. Yeah. Should is another question.
question.
Do they pay? No, they don't pay. To my knowledge, they don't pay.
We'll see if any contractor will take on a project if they'd have to pay for the ecological
Yeah, I
damage.
don't think they wouldn't. They wouldn't. Sometimes they don't even pay for the environmental damage.
That's true. Okay, there are still, I think there were quite a few questions on cost, but you, okay, here's one question. So you said, most if not all the coral restoration projects involve huge amounts of money, taking very long periods of time. And we're not sure about the success rate. I have another question related to that later on. So my question is about avoidance, especially those ecosystems affected by development. Then we try to balance between development and restoration. If we can avoid development at the impacted area, will this be a better option? Because it's actually, if
So let me just say a couple of things about the cost. I wanted to put information about the cost in there because I know that this is something which is not being discussed. No, I mean, I haven't heard anything about, how much it will actually cost depends on so many factors. You can do small projects for relatively small. I did a very, very small project. I was hired because I was very cheap. And we got some good work out of it. And that one was, $65,000 for a 3-year project. And 1 student was supported. And it was a very small area, but it was largely successful. If you do these things well, you actually can get a fairly good success rate. Corals do have some capacity to survive. It will take them tens of years to recover, to grow. Well, I mean, you don't even think about replacing an ecosystem that was destroyed. You just don't even think in those terms. But you can create something that is functional, something that will recruit new babies, something that can support fish over time. If they are left alone and humans don't come and destroy them again, and the water quality is fairly high, then, you know, you can have some success. These things actually can be made to work. It's just this project is an enormous scale. So in terms of the avoid thing, again, I think Dumaguete has to really come to, well, Dumaguete is coming together. Dumaguete is coming together with a resounding, no, we don't want this. This is the message that I keep seeing. It's too high of a price to pay. That's what the people of Dumaguete seem to be saying. The cost, yeah, it really kind of depends on what you have to do. Avoiding the, so what, I think I lost the train of the question.
It's really, the participant was just asking, so isn't it just better to avoid impacting your ecosystems? You know, if we can avoid development, won't that be a better option? Which I
Yes,
think
it's always a better option.
Yes.
Yeah, we already know that that's better when it's possible.
Doc Laurie, it's clear already, or you've shown quite clearly how complex, how expensive it can be, how much effort it will take to restore or even, you know, relocate corals. But even in, say, papers or research, people don't really focus on what happens after you do the relocation, you transfer the coral. So can you give an idea, based on your knowledge of coral restoration projects worldwide, what is the percentage of among these projects where the corals actually thrived, grew, and developed quite well after they were, say, relocated? Or how many would you deem successful? And when you talk about successful, what's successful? How do you know that it's successful?
Well, I can't give an actual number because I haven't done that particular literature search, but when it's done well by people who know what they're doing, no? So these are biologists, divers, coral biologists. When it's done well, I mean, with the work that we're doing, sometimes things can happen that, you know, a storm can come along, things that you cannot, you know, but if you choose your sites well, so you transplant or you outplant or you relocate into a site where the corals are not going to be trampled or dynamited or fished or whatever, have anchors dropped on them, and the water quality is really fairly good, and they are going to a similar depth and not a drastically different location, then you can get fairly high success. They may respond. What we find is that when you first put them down, they freak out. You know, I mean, it's like bringing us, we go to Alaska right now, and like this. So they freak out for a while, but that's usually a few weeks, and then we see them start to recover. We know that there are certain things that when we see those things happening, we say, okay, murag okay na ni, murag makaya na ni nila. Most monitoring, actually most projects I find have some monitoring. Nobody just plants and walks away. They may monitor for a year, 2 years. The first project I cited was 4 years. That's rare. Most places, most funding agencies don't want to fund more than 1 year monitoring. But for the projects that I've been on, like that one small little picture, that small study that we did in Kalag, Ayun, that was, we went back, they went back 4 years later. And we saw, I mean, it rose from something, well, 0% cover of live coral in 4 years, and it was maybe 20% coral cover in that small area, you know, because of that small thing that we did. So, you know, corals just need to be left alone. You don't actually have to sing to them or anything. You just have to put them in a good place, cement them down, and then not bother them, and they'll do their thing. You know, they're fine without human beings. So what happens afterwards? We like to know that our projects are successful. What we find when we do restoration is that it's imperative that we go back within a few days after we've planted, because some things will need to be reattached. Maybe the glue didn't dry properly or something. And we want a very quick assessment how they're doing. So we go back right away. And then we go back, every 2 weeks or something. So scientists monitor to see the effects of their projects, because we are responsible to our funding agencies to say, okay, this was, pretty successsul. That one small project I mentioned to you, I was tasked with producing 20% live cover within a 3-year project. And I think it's about 20% now, about 3 years after we planted. So I think I met that target. COVID interfered with that one. So there is usually some monitoring. And if it's done well and you choose your site well and you batten things down and really attach them, there's some success.
Yes.
You can't say you've created a reef. You've created a coral community. Hopefully things will recruit and the corals will grow. That's what we're looking for.
That would be what we would consider successful. But there are
Yes.
cases where they haven't been that successful.
Yes.
I checked out the Jamaica example that the mayor cited, in which you also presented. And in that situation, they monitored, I think, 2 years, up to 2 years after. And as you said, at first, the corals will sort of like freak out, then maybe grow okay. But they found out in the second year that coral disease started to come in. And I know that's one of your expertise. But what would induce, say, the corals that were transplanted to suddenly acquire coral diseases? What are the usual factors?
Well, when you transplant, you stress. Transplantation is very stressful. Just like the organs inside your body, it's also stressful for you. So that was, whether or not that was a factor, I don't even know if there's any way you could find that out, but certainly it could have been. But a lot of diseases are caused by waterborne bacteria. So the Caribbean right now is undergoing a really horrendous disease, stony coral tissue loss disease. And the general hypothesis right now is that it might be spread by the ballast water in ships. So the ships go to port and they have these bacteria in the water and they release the ballast water and it could be spreading that way. That's one theory, but they don't really know the cause even. So I don't know if it was that disease, if it was stony coral tissue loss or if it was something else. But it could have been caused by the stress of being transplanted, but it also could have been caused by the fact that there are a lot of diseases in the Caribbean.
Present. So let's move on a bit to the legal aspects of doing a coral reef restoration. Well, actually legal or just the proper, somebody asked, what are the proper processes or steps in order to initiate coral reef restoration in places where destruction happens? Or I guess based on your, like the examples you cited, you mentioned that these were already integrated into the plan, like in Dubai. Was it in Dubai? 5 years before the actual project. So is that the usual, what you've seen from, the projects that you're aware, is that built in way before they even propose or start doing the project?
It depends on the laws of the country. Some countries have much more stringent laws protecting the environment. Other countries don't have those laws, and different countries have different permitting requirements and processes. So if a project is in a country that takes its environment seriously, then obviously, yes, you have to incorporate environmental impacts in the very beginning. So usually what is done was, okay, we want this to be here, we want to build this, or we want to dredge this. So there are people that are qualified to go out and do an environmental impact assessment, and that will survey everything that's there, look at the project plans and say, okay, well, your silt is going to go out this far, and your rubble field is going to do this, and you have to do this and that. So it takes knowledge of biology, it takes knowledge of engineering, and it takes knowledge of the laws and the permitting process also. And so all of those are the first step. So then you say, okay, this is what the impact is going to be. Then you make the plan for the project, and the environmental mitigation is worked into that. And that usually is farmed out to contractors that know how to do just that. And then the contractors for the building will hire those contractors for the restoration work. And then the permits are the responsibility of the contractors, or whoever's hiring the contractors to do it. So that would depend on the location. These are really good questions, by the way. Congratulations. Good questions.
I think it's clear that this should have all sort of been, because it seems like there's this, or people are getting this perception that, the proponents of the Smart City project are sort of just reactionary, and it doesn't seem like they really thought a lot about these impacts. Okay.
They did not. No.
You mentioned, so speaking of impacts, there are some questions related to the impacts on the neighboring communities. There's one question here, which is interesting. Can we move the reclamation to, I guess it's just a honest question. Can we move the reclamation to Bakong, since it's mostly sand there?
You have to ask Bakong. Does Bakong want that?
I mean, is it just a matter of moving it to a place where there's no reef? Is it as simple as that? When you're thinking of a marine ecosystem, marine environments, which are so open.
Well, I don't think, I think that the mayor wants it in Dumaguete because he wants to make money off of it. And if it's in Bakong, are the people of Dumaguete going to go down to Bakong to walk along the esplanade? I don't know. So, I mean, that, I understand the reason for the question, but I don't think this project is just, I mean, tonight we're just talking about restoration and impacts to the marine environment. That's really what we're talking about. But when you look at all of the other reasons why this project is problematic, or why it's even being done, diba? I mean, it's supposed to be, well, according to the mayor's side, it's supposed to be this thing that is going to make Dumaguete a better city. Daghan pog reef sa Bakong. Yes, my son-in-law is saying Daghan pog reef sa Bakong. Yes, there are still lots of reefs in Bakong. I don't think Bakong would want this project. Poor Bakong.
And actually, Bakong has a really beautiful seagrass beds.
Yes.
And there is a question here. Seagrass beds will also be buried by this reclamation project, not just coral reefs. No? And the mayor has not said anything about mitigating damage to seagrass beds. Are seagrass beds worth saving? And do you know of seagrass restoration projects? And are they as costly, or would it be similar to a coral restoration project?
That's a really good question. And I thought if I wanted to make my lecture longer, I could have included seagrass. It's not my area of expertise, but in fact, yes, seagrasses, there is some attempts to try to restore them. They are actually quite difficult to restore because they have a root system which is essential to their, just like plants.
Just like plants.
So you can't just pull up a tree and go like this. You start small, and so the development of that very extensive root system is quite difficult. So, I mean, I've tried planting them. They're not easy to plant. So that is something which is completely being ignored, and it cannot be. Yes, seagrass systems are just as important as coral reefs to our health. There was a recent study done by a colleague of mine who actually figured out that seagrasses are filters of bacteria. Not only do they build sand and help to build coastline and beach systems, they filter bacteria. So if you look at the water that's coming from land and flowing across a seagrass bed, it's cleaner on the other side of the seagrass bed. So they are very important filters. They're also very important nursery grounds for all kinds of food that we harvest and other organisms that live on it. So, okay, if we're focusing just on the completely human-centric view, they're important nursery grounds for very key species. So they are essential as well. And they, I think, are probably even harder to restore than coral reefs would be. Coral communities would be. Yeah.
I agree. Okay,
Yes.
just a few more questions, but this is more on a personal. One participant asked, "What are your memories about coral reefs in Dumaguete? Did you learn how to scuba dive on those reefs? Are these memories part of the reason why you think that reclamation is a very, very bad idea?"
Oh,
A bit of nostalgia.
no question. Yes. I learned to dive on Apo Island and Sumilon when I was 14. My father taught me. My father was Dr. Alcala's underwater photographer and buddy for many years. I think that I like to say that I think somehow in my child brain, I figured out that I wanted to be a marine biologist when I was 11 years old, and we were camping on Apo Island. And I got the worst sunburn of my life, which put me at risk for skin cancer for the rest of my life. Thank you very much, climate change. And no sunscreen. And the reason why I got that sunburn was because I was so fascinated. I was snorkeling, and I was snorkeling between the shore and the boat that we were taking. And I just lost track of time. I was so fascinated by what I was seeing. I was 11 years old. And I think that that is the moment that I decided that this is what I wanted to do with my life. Thank you for that question.
Actually, just to continue with that, there was a participant who asked, what are the career paths that I could advise the young generations that are interested in coral reef restoration? I am a teacher and I love giving awareness about these things as a biology graduate. So what are the career paths that they can push through if they find it interesting to pursue this practice or some similar to the field that you follow?
Well, I mean, obviously, they can be like their teacher and go into teaching, teaching science, opening up the brains of young people to the beauty of science. But there are a lot of different jobs. Unfortunately, I have to be honest, you probably have to go to grad school. So if you get out with a bachelor's, it may not be enough to really get a career job, but you could work as a technician, and that might keep you very happy for a while. I hope my employees are happy. But you could work for non-government organizations like World Wildlife Fund and some of the other sort of pro-environment organizations. That is something that if you want that sort of activism type of component, those types of organizations are often, like the forerunners of that kind of thing. You could work for a government organization. If you really want to do your own research and you want to teach, then you have to get the PhD, like our moderator, and then you go into teaching at the university. And then you can have contact with lovely graduate students, and you can help them along their career path as well.
And build more marine scientists and marine biologists, which I think the Philippines need more of. So
Yes.
with that, Doc Laurie, I'd like to ask you to give a message just to wrap up and your final words on our learning event this evening and whatever you'd like to say to our participants to end.
Oh, my goodness. Well, thank you for your patience, for one thing. Thank you for your commitment. I will say it again. I said it at the beginning. I'll say it again. I am so proud of all of you for attending this series. I'm proud of the people that are running it so professionally and so well. And all of these people that have been calling in every night and listening to people make blah blah about things that are concerning them. We live, I'm sure that you've heard some of the news, specifically about the country I hold the passport for, and you are probably aware of the craziness in the world right now about how fact has become secondary to emotion and to misguided commitments to things that are not based at all on fact, and how social media has played into sharing and disseminating misinformation. It's really a very crazy time to be a human being, I think. I mean, not only are we looking at political upheavals that are crazy, but we are also looking at this pandemic, which is scary and killing people by the hundreds of thousands. And the fact that you come here to educate yourselves, and I've come also to learn from other speakers, to learn from people asking the questions, just to try to grapple with this enormous project, which will change the city forever, forever. And in ways that are very frightening. Some of the things that I've been hearing about this just really make me very afraid. We are in such a rapidly changing world, and I'm just so honored to be a part of this. One of my former students is watching from Dubai, making me cry. Just the fact that you're coming together so that you can make fact-based decisions is an absolutely amazing thing. I'm so happy to have been a part of this. So please, let's save our city together, the city that we love so much. Let's not sink into something that we will lose so much of the center of the city and so much of what the city stands for. I think this is a bad thing, and I'm very happy that so many people are really rising up and voicing their opinions about this. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Raymundo, Dr. Laurie, for all this. Actually, I think many people are teary-eyed because to many of us, it is a personal, it's not money, it's not just environment, it's not history, culture, tourism. It's really a personal thing. And I think as long as we have scientists like you and concerned citizens like all of us, we can do something about it. So thank you again, Dr. Raymundo, on behalf of the Dumaguete City Host Lions Club and Rotary Club of Dumaguete South. Thank you to our speaker and to all of you who joined us tonight via Zoom and Facebook Live. Please stay tuned for our next events. Also, kindly like our Facebook page, the Learning Events Series, and stay tuned, be updated on our upcoming events. The Zoom recordings will also be uploaded on our YouTube channel. So those of you who are on a different time zone or your friends or colleagues or can still watch it on YouTube. So should you have any other questions, you can just send it through our Facebook page. So thank you again, everyone, and good evening to all.